Maria?
Yeah, hi everybody. Great to meet some of you for the first time. Good to see those I've already encountered. I am Maria Posey. I just started as the chair of the Child Care Issue Group and quickly, coalesced with the team to consider this new study. And with this presentation, I'm hoping you can see it just fine. We are wanting to present kind of the reason why. So can you all see the screen share?
Yes, but you've got your email up, not the.
Oh, there.
There you go.
This?
You're good.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
So first, some background on the childcare issue with the League. So our last statewide study on childcare was completed 1985 through 87. And it really focused on addressing instances of child abuse and neglect in organized care settings. And so the study looked at criteria around licensing and really professionalizing the industry of childcare to ensure greater quality and safety for the children, relevant education and knowledge for the educators, and just an all-around safer experience. The original study also started looking at affordability, recognizing that women entering and remaining in the workforce, families, but mostly women, really relied on formal childcare in order to improve their careers. But today's issues around childcare, they go beyond licensing, quality, and affordability, and as we'll show you in the next slides, are much more nuanced and complex. So it's really time to kind of update this position from the mid-1980s. Some of the issues that we see in childcare today involve licensing barriers that, while most centers are required to and do complete licensing, the types of providers in the state today are really so varied, ranging from single home care serving a couple of children to larger centers. And I've seen some of these licensing requirements and paperwork that's necessary for biannual reviews by the Department of Social Services, and it's a lot. And it really raises questions on what constitutes adequate licensing to ensure quality without adding additional burden to providers that would be otherwise providing good care but are not able to meet kind of those licensing requirements. There's also a benefits cliff around participation and ability to access childcare, where some economic modeling that was done in a local study showed that by just increasing a monthly income by $10, that could potentially put a family in a position of losing $1,000 a month in the child care subsidy. So while the child care subsidy certainly helps offset some of that burden, whether you are right below or right above those income qualifications can really make a difference in your family's overall economic situation. Childcare staff are also horribly underpaid, despite providing a really vital service and require certification and education to work as a childcare educator. The salary and benefits are really not reflective of that vital service that they provide. Even just a couple weeks ago, I was on a conference call where centers were advertising for positions, desperately needing new staff. And while they had 250 people click on the job advertisement, 0 people applied. Really just showing the disparity between what they're able to offer, especially in times coming out of COVID, those childcare educators in terms of compensating them for the great work and risk that they take, and the ability of staff to work under those compensation packages. the concept of universal pre-K is starting to take hold, or at least expanded pre-K for children ages 3 to 4. But little ones, infants, are woefully absent from that debate. Babies and infants ages 0 to 3 would still just fall under a private run system, and little debate is currently being held on what it really means to provide affordable quality care to that age group versus the 3 to 4-year-olds that really are more suited for that preschool setting to ensure kindergarten readiness and adequate social emotional learning coming into kindergarten. So it really is a different age group that requires its own review. Also a different age group is school-age children. This is kids ages kindergarten through 12, so 5 through 12, that are also absent largely from debates about childcare. Somehow it's presumed in most instances that kids, because they're in school, they can also look after themselves after school, which of course is not the case. And yet very few jobs allow for a workday to end at 2 or 3 p.m. when school lets out. So, you know, there's, aside from one after school care program in Fairfax that's organized by the county, private after school care is the name of the game in Virginia, leaving many, many families and mothers in particular to have to juggle after school care with their careers. And then there's a big question around equity. I mean, we all know that questions around racial equity, rural-urban disequity, class inequity really perpetuate larger systemic issues in our state. And childcare is front and center in that. You know, families are not able to secure adequate childcare. They're not able to participate in the economy. They're missing out on building wealth, passing that wealth on to their children. And so it really has a broader implication of how inequity in access to quality care impacts families as well as impacts the children themselves. You know, that kindergarten readiness metric really is disproportionate and equitable between those that have access and those that don't. So why do we want to do this study now? Well, the COVID-19 epidemic really shined a spotlight on the inadequate nature of the country's and also our state's childcare system, with hundreds of private facilities unable to remain open, women leaving the workforce in record numbers, and counties left to figure out how to provide emergency childcare to residents who need it. And there is a growing awareness that these challenges are compounded for Black and other minority women who make up a disproportionate number of low-income households. Several rounds of federal stimulus bills have added needed funding to childcare sector in the form of emergency stabilization grants and temporary expansion of the childcare subsidy. And the Virginia's First Lady, Pam Northam, and the legislator is looking to expand pre-K. Several advocacy groups are also calling for universal pre-K. So there's growing attention, there's growing funding. So the opportunity to engage is really now. But the issues of childcare are complex, and just infusing more cash into the system won't necessarily ensure that we get a good system, especially once we start digging into issues of quality and equity. You know, we want to make sure that as more funding gets into the system, it's done so responsibly to really make an impact, especially for those that need it the most. And unless there's pressure kept on these issues over time, you're not going to see those outcomes. Right now, there is a spotlight, there's excitement, but the league really can play a role long-term to keep this issue at the forefront of the debate. Because we know this is going to continue being a question of critical importance for women for generations to come, is, you know, how to manage their careers, their other responsibilities, and their children, including younger children, around childcare. So this study lays out a vision for Virginia. The study that we're proposing is organized around these 5 stakeholder groups with a vision statement that reads, no parent, especially Black and minority parents, should ever have to choose between keeping or getting promoted in a job or caring for their child. No child care center should ever have to choose between delivering quality care and remaining operational. At that, every young child is healthy, safe, and learns requisite skills to be ready for kindergarten. And every school-aged child has a safe, nurturing place to go after school until such age as they can look after themselves. Every child care educator has the knowledge, skills, and compensation to deliver quality care to every child. So these are the kind of 5 stakeholder groups that we see driving the child care industry system in Virginia. And we would want to take the opportunity of this study to really examine root causes of why things are not working for each of these stakeholder groups, work through ideation stages of what could we do to address some of those barriers that would come out of the study, and then really recommend to the league some revised positions on how the league could be supportive and advocating for some of the policies, budget changes, et cetera, that would address those barriers and achieve that vision. So that is pretty much the study. The 5 work streams that are mentioned here correspond with the 5 stakeholder groups that were on the previous page. So parents, child care centers, young children, school-aged children, and child care educators. And we would organize the study to look at each of those stakeholder groups and do the kind of analysis and ideation around those groups. So the child care issue group moves that this proposed child care study be approved, be taken to the full plenary for consideration. We also are looking for members to help conduct the study should it be approved. As we envision, it will be a lot of work, a lot of fun work, but work nonetheless. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions. I want to say I'm joined here by my issue group members, Beth and Susan, and we are all happy to provide additional context or feedback.
Does anyone have any questions of Maria? I don't see any raised hands. You answered.
Carla.
Carolyn Kaywood.
I'm accustomed on this topic to go to Voices for Virginia's Children. What do you imagine the study group would do that they're not doing?
Well, I think the study group would consult with them, as well as Child Care Aware, as well as the Virginia Promise Partnership. You know, there are a lot of really good advocacy groups out there working this space, and I think the league could join forces with them and amplify their perspectives, as well as bring our own once we have that articulated in the position.
Okay, we do have a question in the chat. Will the study look at the differences between areas in Virginia?
Yeah, definitely. You know, one of the disparities that we see strongly is between like the northern counties and the more rural southern parts of the state, and really recognizing the vast difference in opportunities for, you know, availability of childcare options across the state.
Beth, did you want to bring in something?
Yeah, I wanted to answer Carolyn's question, Carolyn Kaywood, about Voices for Virginia's Children. I worked on the Charlottesville study, and I found that a lot of organizations were helpful, and Voices for Children is a helpful one, but all of these organizations are bound to their the people who give them money. And I find that being independent, you can often do some research or advocate in a way that those organizations can't. And also, as great as they are, and they are great, there is a real disconnect. And I know those of you who've been in the league know this is true for everything, but there's often a disconnect between those doing policy and those on the ground working.
Okay, Beth, we are out of time.
Okay. And
I
we
think-
can, okay,
think
we
Carla,
can do the,
Beth, we're out of time for this segment.
okay, we can
But
do the on the ground work.
Carla Heath did have her hand up, so we'll give you one more minute. Carla, do you have a quick question?
Not a question, not a comment. You haven't talked about the fact that nobody is willing to provide the services. And that's part of the issue. If there aren't, and Lynchburg has a desert, there are 3 times as many babies born every year as services available for infants.
Okay, okay, thank you. Thank you, Maria, and your whole group for that presentation. The next one is going to be education funding. Beth Obenchain and Mary Jennings, are you ready to go? Beth, you're muted.
Here we
Hey.
go.
You're good.
Okay.
Ms. Mary?
Okay. Is can everyone see the screen?
No, your
Oh,
screen
hold
is
on
not
just a
being
second.
shared.
Okay, hold on. Is that up now? Joan, can you see the
No,
screen?
no, your screen is not up, Beth.
I don't need to be speaking. Beth's doing it.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
Well, let's see.
I have it here. You sent it to me. Why don't you start talking and I will put it up.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, good day. Hello. I'm Beth Obenchain. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County, the community of Virginia Tech and Blacksburg and Christiansburg. And Mary Jennings is also here with the Washington. She's president of the Washington County League, whose community includes Abingdon and the famous Barter Theater. And we are proposing, let's see. Joan, are you moving this or am I? Okay, right. We are proposing a study on funding, education equity funding in the state of Virginia. And as many of you know, our state constitution calls for the state to ensure an educational program of high quality. It's interesting, it just says the state shall seek, it does not require it. And data, we have just finished a 3-year study here in Montgomery County of funding for our Montgomery County school system. And data, both locally and statewide, indicate that state funding of local schools is both inadequate and inequitable. So our study, I don't want to read this. I hate people who read PowerPoints again, but we will define what a high quality education is. And we feel this is necessary because there have been several previous league education studies, but things have changed so rapidly with technology, broadband, special needs. So the main question we are going to be looking at is, do the state standards of quality sufficiently define and then guarantee that this high quality education is available for all students, not just students in wealthier school systems? So let's see, can we go to the next slide? Yes, so I'm sorry, the second. Joan, yes. So one of the things we will do is determine the cost of providing that high quality education and whether the state does provide sufficient funds in each locality to provide that education. And so one of the major parts of this study is going to be studying the capacity of each local school division to provide that high quality education that supposedly the state funds. And again, the concern here is to assure equity for all students, whether you live in a wealthy urban neighborhood, an urban school system with a largely minority population, and a small rural school system that where the roof leaks and you use trash cans just to absorb the water leaking in. So that is going to be a major part of what we are looking at. The next slide. So we will be documenting also how Virginia's capacity and their effort match other states. I think as we've seen before, Virginia ranks 12th, and I've been writing as a newspaper editor, I've been writing editorials about this before I retired, 25 years ago. Virginia always ranked in the 40th, and at one time 48th in funding for per pupil funding for education, even though we always ranked as like the 12th wealthiest state in the nation. So we will be looking also at how other states fund school construction and modernization as well, since we know that is a major issue in Virginia, is that all the burden of school infrastructure, building new schools, modernizing schools, providing technology is on each locality, regardless of their capacity. Okay, next slide. This is just an example of, some of the schools here go back a long way and have not been sufficiently modernized or replaced. Okay, let's see the next slide. So the study, again, as I mentioned, Virginia is the 12th wealthiest state, now ranks 40th. So when local funding, our localities are struggling to do the best they can. When you focus, add in local funding, we rank 27th in the nation. So it shows that more of the burden is being carried by our localities. On the next slide, excuse me. So we'll be looking at the annual operating budget because, and this is one of the places where we see major disparities. When you look at the difference in per pupil funding between a wealthy Northern Virginia urban school system and a rural school system, even like Washington County, which has the city of Abingdon, that difference for just a 20 student classroom can add up to $100,000 in one classroom. Some of that actually is higher teacher salaries, but certainly not all of it. That money provides technology, facilities, all sorts of other educational needs that some of the poor schools that's what we want to take a look at, is how that does affect that discrepancy affects the quality of education in different school divisions. Okay. This gives you an example of that significant difference. If you look, some of the counties like Giles County, which is next to Montgomery County out here, has $10,000 per pupil as compared to, say, a Fairfax with $16,000 per pupil. So you can see there is a wide disparity in, and that even is with state funding included. So there's a great gap in fiscal capacity between many of these school systems and localities. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Again, it shows the state is making some effort to try and balance that out, but it is not nearly, we feel that it's, at least the preliminary data we see, it's probably not nearly enough And yet we have to nail down and really have that data before we can go to the General Assembly and lobby and say, here is the system that can help us guarantee equity for each student, no matter where they are going to school. And so that's what we'll be looking at. And this does, again, just gives you an example of what we're talking about. In the last General Assembly, some legislators said, oh, if those counties in Southwest Virginia would just do, would just tax themselves more. Well, it's hard to tax yourself out of the fiscal problem when you look at this at a 1 cent tax increase in Lee County only provides $31 per pupil, whereas in Alexander, it would produce over 300. And again, that's just an example. Okay, next slide. We are also, again, part of this study has to be looking at facilities because that is a huge issue. Next slide. Thank you. This is a quote from the School Construction and Renovation Commission that this is one of the biggest concerns and responsibilities and biggest problems is having to come up with the money to build new schools in a poorer county. And even if they're not building all new schools, simply to keep it modernized, to get broadband, to equip schools to handle the amount of computers and other technology needed today. So this is one of the major issues we'll be looking at. Next slide. The Commonwealth Institute, again, is pointing out we're starting this study at one of the rare times when all of a sudden our state and even some of the school systems are flush with money. We're getting, I think you've all heard, we're getting $7 billion in federal COVID funding. But part of the question is that's only one-time money. So there are two questions there. One, I think go to the next slide. One of the questions is how is that one-time money shared in a way to try and address inequalities in education funding and guarantee equity? And the other question, you can go to the next slide, is after this one-time money is gone, what is the General Assembly going to do to develop a funding policy that does address continuing infrastructure needs as well as operating fund needs in our school system? Because those generous COVID funds are going to be here. They could be a huge one-time help for this problem, but then they're going to be gone. And the part of the question is, are those dollars spent wisely in a way that addresses school inequity? So that is our proposal. And I think my contact information is also at the bottom of that slide. Mary Jennings is also here and can answer any questions.
Anyone have any questions? Please use the raise your hand. That was quite a comprehensive.
Yeah, there's several. Susan Corey and Martha Price Stevens.
Yep, here we go. Susan? Susan Corey?
Yes. Hi. My question, this sounds like a PhD thesis. I mean, the breadth of this, of what you're talking about covering with this study. Yeah. When the study is all done, what do you hope it will do?
I hope it will come up with some specific recommendations. And I agree with you. It's daunting. I think hopefully that there are groups like there's right now a coalition of small and rural schools doing a lot of research, the Commonwealth Institute. I think what we hope to come up with is some concrete suggestions of here is how the state can develop a funding policy and funding percentage, a way of allocating money that is more fair, that helps guarantee equal education opportunity for all students. So I think what we are we'll be looking to come up with are some concrete, a list, hopefully not too long a list of, here are some policy guidelines of the best ways that the state could measure and assign money to school systems based on the research we've come up with. And again, recommendations from different superintendents and school experts
Yeah.
statewide.
Could I ask who is on your committee who will be doing this work?
Well, and one, we would welcome and hope some people from the education issue group will be on here. I have our retiring school board chair from Montgomery County is going to be on the study commission. Also the author of our 3-year study that we just finished as COVID hit, Dempsey Warner, who was head of the College of Education at Virginia Tech. He is also going to be involved. And Mary, I will let Mary go into. Mary has recruited several people. Mary, do you want to?
Keith Perrigan is the president of the Small and Rural Schools Coalition and also the superintendent of the Bristol, Virginia schools. He is on our committee as well as a former school board member and a college student, among others. There are 3 members currently of the Education Committee that have agreed to work on it. And then Carol Noggle, who did the last study related to education, is also on our committee. That last study, I saw somebody ask that question. That last study was in 2018 and basically dealt with the not-for-profit schools or the for-profit schools, charter schools, and why we objected to that. So they very effectively did a revision of that section of the education guidance. But if you look at what is in there, it needs to be revised.
Okay, we are unfortunately out of time for this segment, but there are other questions. If the presenters maybe can stay a while, if not, we'll do it by email, but we want to give equal time to everyone and then we may be able to go back. Thank you.
We'll be glad to stay.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. Our next presenter is Linda Cole, who will be doing environmental justice. Linda?
Thank you, Joan, and thank you to all the delegates that are here this evening, taking precious time to listen to our proposals. I am Linda Cole, and I am with the Williamsburg Area League. I am also a member of the Environmental Issue Group for the state. I moved to establish a study that reviews the League of Women Voters Virginia Natural Resource Position to address how the Commonwealth can best support environmental justice initiatives to halt or prevent future racial and economic environmental inequalities. I'd like to start off by letting us know why environmental justice matters to the League of Women Voters. And to do that, I would like to provide common definitions for us so that we have a common understanding. According to the United States Environmental Protection Agency, environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income. And the important part here is with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Next. Carolyn, could you advance, please? The League does have a position on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And according to the United States League, diversity refers to population groups that have been historically underrepresented. Equity is an approach based in fairness to ensure everyone is given equal opportunity And inclusion refers to the degree to which diverse individuals are able to participate fully. Next. So we would ask, why wouldn't environmental justice and DEI kind of be the same thing? Well, no, not really. Both do recognize that historically, groups have been underrepresented in socially, political, or economically powerful institutions and organizations. Both also recognize that there has been environmental harm done, but DEI strives to ensure that all people have a place at the table within our organization at our various league levels. Environmental justice, however, strives to ensure that all people have a place at the table within all organizations as environmental decisions are being made. Next. So why does environmental justice matter federally? Well, at the last Congress, the Environmental Justice for All Act was introduced, referred to committee, and died with the seating of the new Congress, the 117th Congress. Same with the Senate, introduced the similar bill, referred to committee, where it also died. However, in the Senate, the bill was reintroduced as Senate Bill 872 in March and has been referred to committee. So that's where we stand congressionally. And the White House executive branch, the White House has submitted their request for fiscal year 2022 discretionary funding plus up to the House Committee on Appropriations. And they are requesting $1.4 billion to support communities across the nation that have been marginalized and overburdened. And within that $140 billion request, the set aside for the EPA is almost $1 billion to accelerate environmental and economic justice. Next. So does environmental justice matter here in Virginia? Well, yes, it does. The Virginia Environmental Justice Act is codified. And based on that codification, there was a budget amendment for an interagency environmental justice working group. So we have a working group. The DEQ, the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, completed a study in the fall of 2020 and recommended improving community relations, engagement, and capacity. Then just this past April, they announced that the creation of Environmental Justice Office within the DEQ. Next. So why would the environmental justice matter to the League of Women Voters? Our 2019 Natural Resources Positions for Action address 5 areas: air quality, fracking, land use, water supply, and distribution, but not so much environmental justice. Under air quality, we want to achieve and maintain acceptable air quality. Just in April, the New York Times issued an article based on a study out of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. It indicated people of color suffer disproportionately from pollution. And at first they thought it would probably be air pollution, but the authors of the study came back and said, no, all environmental indicators were disproportionately affect people of color. And for Black, Hispanic, and Asian peoples, it's the industrial and light duty gas vehicles that are the major environmental indicators. For land use, our position is we would like to create long-range comprehensive land use plans. And environmental justice in that regard should be seen as a comprehensive, not a compartmentalized planning effort. For example, the Washington Post issued an article on the 19th of April indicating that the St. James Parish in Louisiana, 91% of which is Black, is being asked to have a Formosa plastics plant constructed in their area, and that would submit 800 tons of not just chemicals, but toxic chemicals into the air in their area. And people don't speak up when jobs are on the line oftentimes. There has to be a voice for people. Right now that plastics plant has been on hold due to COVID, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has actually withdrawn their permit to fill in some wetlands. So it's on hold right now, but it is actually part of a corridor of industrialized plants near these neighborhoods, these communities, where you used to have grocery stores and basketball courts, and now they're filled with chemical plants and petrol plants and other high pollution producing industries. Water supply and distribution, the league, we recommend protecting water supplies. 19% of Native Americans lack, as compared to whites, lack basic indoor plumbing. And that is both water supply and sewage treatment. And so where does environmental justice fit into these natural resource positions? It is conspicuously absent. Next. So why do we need the league's support? While it's not a new concept, it's been a while for a while, it's become a priority at all levels, both federal, state, and local. Here in Virginia, our Environmental Justice Act is not ideal. It's just in its infancy. Implementation is evolving and requires transparency. So here there is an opportunity for environmental improvement, but also environmental harm. Collective memory is short, promises are made, but often not kept, unless there's a consistent voice standing with the people most impacted by environmental harm and least able to affect the change. So our voices must be heard. It's imperative that league positions ensure environmental justice is a priority at all levels. And that's what our study proposes. Thank you very much. Next, please. I'd like to recognize Carolyn Kaywood, who is on this presentation with us, who's helping with the slide presentation, and also Linda Rice. Both of these league advocates have worked tirelessly on the study group and are here for any questions that you might have. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions? Any hands up? It's not moving quickly. Linda, do you see any? I do not, but my computer just decided to get cold.
Let me go to a view where I can see the gallery.
Yeah. Now it came back to it.
Oh, come on, guys. There's got to be questions.
There was a question in the chat.
There is one in the chat. Environmental
Okay.
justice is a national issue. Would this be more appropriate to study on a national as opposed to a state level?
If I could throw myself into the breach.
Absolutely.
A sort of parallel thing going on is a group working nationally, a league group working nationally on climate issues, one of the subgroups of which is climate justice. So that is going on. Climate is both broader and narrower than environment, in that toxic waste is not necessarily a climate change issue. So the two are related, but not duplicative. Does that help?
Yeah, I'd like to say something. I think I'm muted.
No,
Hi,
you're good, Linda. Go ahead.
this is Linda Rice. Yeah, hi. Yeah, the reason this is really a state issue, I don't know how many of you remember there was a discussion in this last General Assembly session about the siting of a plastics, I guess you would say manufacturing plant, maybe not manufacturing, but recycling type of plant in Cumberland County. And there was a lot of concern by some of the locals about that. And unfortunately, it looks as if right now that plan is gone. It's going to go forward. I think the General Assembly voted to support it. The point being, though, that there is unfortunately a population in Cumberland County, which is primarily a minority group that is going to be affected primarily by this structure. And very little is really understood about the types of waste streams. Carolyn was mentioning this, the types of waste streams and or even air quality issues, possibly water quality issues that might result from this siting. There have been other instances of this as well. I think one of the pipelines, I think going through Buckingham County, that was another issue in Virginia where we had minority groups being adversely affected. So what I'm coming back to is this is definitely an issue for Virginia. We are, unfortunately, it seems like a hotbed for folks coming from different areas, sometimes from the Northeast, looking for rural settings where they can essentially put these, types of, let's say, manufacturing plants, landfills or whatever. I mean, we have the same issue in Charles City County as well.
Okay, we're running out of
So
time.
I guess what I'm saying is that's one reason I really support us trying to look at this matter in Virginia.
Okay, let's get one. Martha, you've had.
Jen, we have two
Right.
hands.
Martha, Martha's had her hand up for two groups. So Martha, get yours in and then we may have to, Beth, we may have to hold you to the end. Martha?
Yeah, thank you. How will you address, the issue of big companies coming in and wanting to build whatever it is in those areas where it does affect people who don't have a voice? I mean, how do you fight that? And then how do you also address the lack of jobs? I mean, some of those same people might lose jobs that they would have had.
And I think, Martha, that is one of the issues, is that, when it comes to jobs, and that is one of the ways that, especially industrial companies couch their planning, is that we're going to bring in, this many jobs. And that's why it's very difficult for people in those areas to actually organize and stand up against it. But there's no way, I can't see any way that the league could prevent someone from coming in, but we can certainly, if we had the appropriate positions to advocate, we can certainly advocate for an environment, for the environmental justice indicator to be part of the planning process. And there's a lot of work that's going on, but prevention of a plant from coming in, I'm a realist. I don't see how that, but we could put our voice with people that don't right now have that opportunity or that voice. And that is where we are most powerful.
Yeah,
Great.
and you
Thank
can
you.
also mitigate impacts. You don't
Okay,
necessarily.
guys, we are way over on this
Mitigate
segment,
impacts.
so let's we have to be fair and give Janet her turn, and then we can ask more questions later. So our final presenter is Janet Boyd, who will be discussing money in politics. Janet?
I'm unmuting. I'm going to be sharing my slides here.
You're good.
Thank you. And thank you for this time. And interestingly, it's probably helpful that I'm the last one, because to be honest, I really think that a lot of what we do is more likely to have success if we have good campaign finance in our state. And so this particular study, I'm going to just show you what the basics are. Is first is the description. It's the study will cover pretty much everything relating to campaign financing, from the donations, who actually donates the money, public disclosure of the donations, transparency, through expenditures such as limits on personal use, as well as enforcement, which would be setting up or making some recommendations with regard to what kind of structure in the Virginia executive branch should be responsible for enforcing campaign finance rules. The participants right now are primarily part of the campaign finance reform issue group. As you can see here, we do have a variety of people that are interested in it, but we're very much like other groups interested in getting additional folks involved if at all possible. So what's the rationale for the study? And I know a lot of you have discussed that with the other studies that we just have reviewed, but basically I want to focus on three different reasons why we need to have this study at this time. And the first I'll talk about is that the General Assembly is likely to act on it. Second, I'll talk about how the League of Women Voters US position, which is what we currently use to do advocacy in this area, is inadequate in Virginia. And then finally, I'll discuss how there's already a commitment to this issue, and it's just a matter of trying to put some discipline through a study.
Excuse me, Janet, I don't mean to interrupt, but you're not advancing. Your slides are not advancing.
They're not.
No, ma'am.
They're advancing on mine. So let's try and see what the problem is here.
Computer monsters. Oh, there you go.
Can you see it?
Now you're on 4. Yeah, now we're moving.
Okay, we'll just do it that way. Normally I like to do the whole screen, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Okay.
So at any rate, the first sort of range of issues is that the General Assembly is poised to act. As many of you were probably aware, in the 2021 session, and even a little bit in 2020, and even in prior sessions of the General Assembly, there has been some efforts to try to get a handle on this. None of the key bills passed in 2021, but they did pass a study, which will be conducted through a joint subcommittee that will consist of both the legislatures or members of the General Assembly, as well as citizen members. And in fact, we're trying to get one of our people into that group as well. None of the members have been named yet. So, but they're poised to do something. So this is a good time for us as the league to get involved in it. And as I mentioned, the League of Women Voters US position, which is what we've been relying on to do our advocacy so far, is inadequate. And a lot of the reason why it's inadequate is because Virginia is uniquely in a bad position with regard to campaign finance rules. And in fact, it is one of only 5 states without any restrictions now on campaign donations. And unlike a lot of other states, the structure for actually enforcing what rules we do have is not very good. We do have fairly good disclosure rules, but even those disclosure rules are not keeping up with the new technologies. So I put here, and you'll get a copy of these slides, what the current League of Women Voters US position is. It's good, it's broad, but it doesn't provide the kind of details that we need in order to be effective in this area. Finally, I wanted to sort of focus on the fact that, yes, we do have commitment from the board so far, and I do agree the rest of the studies have probably satisfied this as well. There was a issue group that was created. The issue group does cover the same areas that we want the study to do, but the issue group is not, not in a position to be able to create new positions, and this is what we are hoping that the study will allow us to do. We did quite a bit of advocacy through the advocacy team during the 2021 session. And like I said at the first slide, we were not as successful as we'd like to be, but we were successful in being able to encourage the study. And so the study is sort of our stair step to get this done. So that's it. Nice and fast. I made up a little bit of time, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions if anybody has.
Yeah, Janet, there's a question in chat about, sorry, it just went off my screen. What about barring corporate donations or out-of-state donations?
All part, and you're absolutely right. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is all going to be part of the study. The study will, again, focus on not only where do the donations or even the amount of the donations through the whole process, including how the various candidates use their funds. So that's a good question.
Okay. Anyone else have questions for Janet? Any hands up? People are cogitating. Maria.
Yeah, I have a question. You know, I looked a lot at the campaign finance issue too, and you know, while certainly unlimits, you know, an unrestricted amount and type of fundraising is harmful. I'm curious as to whether the study would also look at alternative ways of funding campaigns, thinking specifically that you wouldn't want the lack of ability to fundraise to become a barrier for diverse candidates of different economic statuses to be able to, you know, run and win.
And you're correct. And that's a lot of what is the pushback is, and I know you'll look at one of the individuals that's running for governor, Carol Foy. She took a very large donation from, I think it's from one of the environmental groups, which actually exceeds the limitation that she has put in her package of improvements. And that is correct. There is some challenges there, but if everybody's working under the same set of rules, then the likelihood, and as long as those rules are fair across the board, then the likelihood of one company, for example, you know, obviously the guilty one in Virginia generally is thought of as Dominion, that one company won't have an inordinate ability to influence members of the General Assembly. So as long as it's a fair, equal rule, then presumably individuals across all economic strata will be impacted similarly.
So I guess I would just encourage the study group to also consider equity and not just equality in the study. You know, recognizing that a lot of the candidates are not coming from an equal standing entering the campaign world.
It's a good point. Thank you.
Very good point. There's a question about will it address the possibility of restraining media buys?
Let me just note that as something that people are interested in. For the most part, most of this kind of review isn't perhaps that detailed. It's more to making sure that if the money is spent, it's spent on legitimate campaign type of expenditures, not so much whether you spend most of it on media buys or most of it on consultants or any of that nature. But that's a good point. I'll make note of that.
Ken, isn't a lot of it just looking at fairness and reporting, right? Because aren't we considered the Wild
reporting
West?
is legitimate. How much is the ability for any one individual to contribute, millions of dollars or perhaps thousands of dollars is another area that is watched very carefully and something that we'll look into.
Okay, there's another question about will the study be going on concurrently with the General Assembly Joint Study Committee? Will the Joint Committee report be completed? It should be completed before our study is completed, right? Won't that be this year?
It probably will. That's a good point. And one of the questions is, does it make sense to do a study that might actually be finished after the joint subcommittee comes up with the recommendations? I think it is. We will participate as a issue group into the advocacy efforts of the League of Women Voters of Virginia in that joint subcommittee. We will do so. But once once they come up with the recommendations, we'll be in a better position to be able to manage and figure out how best to advocate for or against them.
There's another question about reviewing the study. Would you review how your study will provide different results from the larger national study? I know you touched on it, talking about the peculiarities of Virginia law, but is that why the national study is so difficult for us to advocate on?
Yeah, I mean, like it or not, campaign finance rules are done at the state level. And so the National League does provide some good guardrails on what is appropriate and what is not. But for us to be effective in getting what we want done in Virginia, and again, Virginia is uniquely positioned as being sort of at the bottom end of the heap as far as any sort of regulatory structure in this area, we need to have positions that are focused just on what Virginia needs. We can, again, rely on a lot of the good work that the National League has done, but for us to be effective, we really need to have Virginia positions.
And Carolyn Kaywood is pointing out, nobody wants to talk tonight. Everybody's chatting. That the legislative committee recommendations don't always get turned into law right away. And she's noticing Governor Kane's gun violence prevention study. Alice is asking if we do the study in 1 year and have it passed by concurrence at the council. No, we don't do that. There was a question about that this year with the election study. And because council is not represented by every delegate, you cannot vote on it. It must be voted on by a majority of the people who are delegates of each league. So we cannot pass something at council. Does anyone else have any questions for Janet? Okay, well, I thank you as all the others as well. These are all great studies. Round of applause for all of the hard work done here for everyone. We did want to be respectful of the hour because we know people usually start zooming out literally after an hour. But if the presenters don't mind staying for a little bit longer, I know that there were some leftover questions that we did not get to because we wanted to get everybody in as close to that hour as possible. So if you all would like to stay, if some of the presenters can stay, we could go back and visit some of those questions. If not, thank you all for coming. It's a lot of hard work and very attentive questions. Tomorrow we'll have training on how to work the plenary at 2 o'clock, and then there'll be the same exact training at 7 p.m. You would have signed up already when you did your registration. So if anyone would like to stay and ask questions. If not, thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow. So does anybody have any questions for the presenters that we did not get a chance to do? Beth.
Okay, I had a quick question for the environmental justice study. You talked about the populations that are being affected by the environmental issues. And I was wondering how you're going to hear their voices. You kind of touched on this, but I was wondering about your process. Will you go in and interview people, or what are your ideas as far as the process of your study? Will you go, interview people who are actually living in areas where there's an environmental justice issue, or how will you hear their voice?
There's an environmental justice listserv, for lack of a better word, that involves a lot of grassroots participation. For example, right now, the people are struggling with the tension between a proposed Walmart and the historic Black community of Brown Grove. I believe that's Hanover County. The previous one I got involved with previously is Charles City County, which is between Hampton Roads and Richmond. There was I forget the code, something like CG4 something gas plant proposed that, talking noise, toxic fumes, all these things. The thing that got me writing letters was that they fulfilled the letter of the requirement to publicize the public hearing by putting a notice in Style Weekly. This is a rural community. I mean, it was almost a slap in the face. So there was little awareness in advance that this thing was about to dump in their laps, and it's like the third plant. And that's something that the Congressional Natural Resources House Committee is looking into, is cumulative impact. Currently, the Department of Environmental Quality in Virginia treats every permitting decision as though it descended from the heavens and nothing had ever happened to a community before and nothing will ever happen again. And typically the same things are happening over and over again in the same communities, as the delegate from District 100 said, because that's where the land's cheap.
Mm.
So what I've learned out of this already is that we focus a lot on the General Assembly, and that's critically important. But we need to think about permitting processes and regulations as part of what the government does to make things happen for good or ill. And I think re-examining our natural resources positions with this in mind, the DEI lens, will enable us to see ways to be effective that we haven't explored in the past. And that's my long-winded answer.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Linda, do you want to add something? Then we'll go to Martha.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think one of the problems in Virginia has been, there hasn't been good coordination amongst all these different departments. Yes, Carolyn's right about the DEQ getting involved in permitting processes. But what's happening now with these different proposals is you have issues related to public health. As far as I know, the Virginia Department of Health isn't typically consulted on some of these projects. You've even got VDOT, which has got a finger in the game as well. So where I'm going with this is one of the reasons I think this is important for Virginia and it's possibly something the governor's new commission is going to look at, is better integration amongst all these different state departments when issues like this come up, and not just simply going to the, the DEQ, because the ramifications of a lot of these projects are far broader.
Okay, Martha, you're up.
Thank you. For the education inequity study, I wanted to ask whether they would consider or how they will look at the influence of PTAs, and maybe even consider having someone from the PTA on their committee.
Excuse me. Beth?
Is Beth
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we would absolutely love and need to have people from the PTA. And also school, we have a school librarian, one of our Blacksburg school librarians is already very excited about being on the student. But actually, yeah, absolutely. We do need the parents. That's a great idea, certainly. And in fact, would welcome if any of you do have PTA officials in your leagues, please connect us with them. And again, we want and need voices from across the state, from all divergent, all different school school systems, size, wealth, different populations. It's a statewide issue.
Anyone else have any questions? I don't see any hands raised. Okay. Looks like you answered every question. Yay. Thank you all again for all of your hard work, and thanks to everyone who has come. We'll see everybody at some point tomorrow for training.
Joan, could you review that? And I should 2 o'clock or?
Yeah, you would have signed up when you registered, but yeah, there's a training on how to vote, how to, what's this weird world of virtual plenary. There's one at 2, and the exact same one will be held at 7. We just wanted to make sure we had people who had to go to work.
Okay.
And then the housing caucus is Thursday night,
Right.
and the election integrity caucus is Friday night. One good thing about virtuals, we used to have to do all this on Friday night, and then you'd have to pick and choose what you would go to. So at least this is a little bit better. I'm looking for the silver lining in the virtual thing. All right, gang. Thank you all again. Thanks for all the hard work, and we'll be seeing a lot of each other this week. So we'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye now.